Welcome to another. Today is Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. I'm Tulio Siragusa, broadcasting from Southern California. Joining me today are Carlos Ponce in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico. And our guest, broadcasting from Austin, Texas, Juan Acosta of Tabella. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
So we've had over 400 shows, I think, so far on Dojo Live, and we talked to all kinds of technology company luminaries across multiple industries, but we've never had a guest like this. And it's an industry that is a big industry. It's the faith industry. So we're going to be talking today about faith and technology. But before we do, let's get to know our guest a little bit and talk about his company and then kick off the conversation, see what we can learn today. Juan, please give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself. Welcome to the show again.
Awesome. Well, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Juan Acosta. I am the founder of Tabella. We can talk about Tabella a bit later. But introducing myself, I live in Austin, Texas right now. I was actually born in Venezuela. I moved to the U.S. when I was about 8 or 9 years old. One of the best things that's happened really in my life. I love the U.S. and the opportunities that it's provided my family and I. I lived in Miami for quite some time. I started my career after high school, per se, studying engineering, something completely different, aerospace engineering. After a few years there, there were a bunch of things that happened in my life, my dad's health, his business, my family. There were quite a lot of challenges. So I actually dropped out of school the first time to actually go work and help out. And I did that for many years. I just worked odd jobs. I started as working at a flower shop, and then I said yes to a bunch of opportunities. And somehow I ended up in technology and building products and entrepreneurship. Many years later, I went back to school, but then dropped out for the second time. This time around was because I had that entrepreneurial bug. So I think I'm like one semester away from being an aerospace engineer, but I decided that it was not what I wanted to do in life, and that I had a bigger purpose, and I didn't know what it was at the time. And God put me in California. So I moved from Miami to California, and I started working with one of the biggest venture capitalists in the world. He's funded probably almost every company you could think of: Hotmail, SpaceX, Tesla, everything, really, Twitch. And from him, I learned quite a lot, and I led his accelerator. So I used to train young entrepreneurs in how to launch businesses, how to be better leaders from all over the world. I was there for 4 years. I was COO of Draper U, and I also did pre-seed investments in early stage companies. And after that, I started Tabella. There were a series of miracles in my life that happened to me, so I decided to jump off and do that, and it's been great. We started in 2020, and here we are.
What an amazing
There must be
story.
some secret in Venezuelan cooking, or I don't know, because you don't look old enough to have gone through all.
Oh, well, I do love arepas. I wish Austin, Texas had more places. There's only like one little food
Dallas.
place.
You got to go to Dallas.
Yes, there's a lot of influence there. That's true.
But, Miami, it's obligatory.
If I wasn't
All
here
right.
in Texas, I'd be definitely in Miami. It's one of my favorite cities.
Yes, it's a very Latino-friendly community. So tell us a little bit about Tabella. What gave birth to this idea? What is it that you guys do?
Sure. So Tabella is the social tech fabric for Catholic communities. So what does that mean? What does it look like? It's a social app, really, that allows you to connect with your parishes, your nearby churches, as well as your nearby groups. If you're part of a Bible study group or a rosary praying group, they usually communicate in WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, all these secular platforms. So we give them a safe and secure faith space where they can do all of that and more. And at the same time, on the app, you're able to pray. You have the rosary, for example, which is a huge devotion in the Catholic faith. You can listen to the daily gospel every day. And it's all absolutely free for the user, and it's also free for parishes and churches. So we, from my knowledge, we're the only company that actually serves the church by not charging them, so that they can have a better communications tool and that they don't have excuses to not have that digital engagement with their parishioners. And that's part of what we do, but there's a huge roadmap ahead as we continue serving a very underserved community, which is 1.4 billion Catholics around the world that have not been served with technology or things to help them advance in their faith outside of church walls. So that's who we're building for. And there's many products and services that will roll out over time.
So before we go into the topic today, just want to paint the picture of how big this is in terms of, let's call it opportunity. So you said 1.4 billion Catholics out of, I think, 4.5 billion Christians. Is that correct?
2.4 billion Christians.
2.4. Mm-hmm. That's a huge marketplace. So let's go into the topic and find out everything we can, give or take a few hundred million. Let's go right into the topic and see what we can learn. I'm curious also, how do you make money at this, right? Yeah. So Kim, please, let's kick it off.
Yeah, thank you, Tulio, Juan, Carlos, for being here today. The topic as chosen by Juan is faith and technology. How can a religious community leverage technology to serve their people? So the first question for you today, Juan, is why? Why did you choose this particular tagline, this particular topic for today? Why did you see it as timely?
Yeah, it's very timely. As you know, the world has gone through massive pain all at once with the pandemic and things caused by it, or effects that it's had in other aspects of life. And I think in great suffering is really when the world comes actually closer to God and understanding what our mission here on earth is. So I think it is timely in terms of how do we live our faith, especially in a world that's been locked up for quite some time, in a world that there's a lot of suffering. There's always been suffering, but now it's one of these things that everyone experienced in some way or another. So it is very timely. Faith is something integral in my life, and I've seen it be the reason for my existence and my family's highs and lows. That's really been the core at all points, is been our faith and our faith in God. And I've seen what it's been able to do to me. And I used to work in a very secular environment. I was investing in startups and training entrepreneurs, and you see a lot of void of that. And I think faith is core to almost every human. If you think about it, some of the biggest questions we have relate to our faith, whether you subscribe to a religion or not. Some of the biggest questions that science tries to answer and that us as humans, we try to answer and we ask ourselves, they're all revolving around faith and what comes after. And I just think it's an integral part of the human experience. And it's a population that's been underserved by technology and completely overlooked, to be honest.
And talking about the human experience and an integral part, technology, at least in 2021, right, is an integral part of the human experience. Any country, no matter where you go on the planet, you'd be hard-pressed to find people without smartphones. Mm-hmm. So why is there this gap between faith and technology? Why, like Tulio was saying, after 400 shows, at least our recollection, this is the only app out of 400, right, leaning toward faith? Why is there that gap between faith and technology, do you think?
Yeah, I think partly is because of the secularization that's happening. There are countries or areas that are becoming more and more secular. And that's just a trend over the past 40, 50 years. But if you look just 50 years ago, which is just right around the corner, really, the Catholic faith in particular and the Christian world and religions really for the past thousands of years have been the center of society, have been the center of civilization, have actually been the center of innovation, which that sounds weird, right? Like you usually don't assimilate like the church with innovation, but really if you start reading and seeing all the research, like space exploration and some of the biggest scientists and some of the biggest discoveries, those were all sponsored by the church itself for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's really only been over the past 40, 50 years. I do think it might not be the reason for it, but there is a correlation with, oh, there's been more tech. It seems like people are more distracted and find their gaps or their emotions filled by other flashy things, that sometimes we've forgotten about that faith component. And we're here to change that. We're here to provide the best technology for that faith experience.
Juan, I'm curious about something in particular. I think this is a very interesting conversation, Juan, because let me give you a little background. I'm personally interested in spirituality as a whole, right? I have not fully embraced one religion in particular, but I'm very interested in spirituality and all things spiritual, in different with the different let's call it, how can I say this, tones or different views, right? So in the context of spirituality as a broad scenario for practitioners of any religion, I'm very interested in how the model of Tabella could be maybe applied towards other areas of spiritual, let's call it areas of spirituality. I would not on purpose want to use the word religions, because I think it's a very maybe it could be some subjective aspect in there. But things like, for example, Buddhism or other religions or cultures that are out there, what aspect of Tabella do you think can be applied towards other spiritual disciplines or cultures or religions that can benefit from what Tabella is doing?
Sure. I mean, if you look at what faith communities are, aside from if you want to put the religious element away and some of the traditions, although it's really hard to detach them because that's
of course
what it is. However,
of course,
it's a community. It's
yes.
a group of people that all share mostly the same values and want to be with each other. And part of that growth, that human growth, is that experience of being in community. Community is one of those core things that we need as humans for our survival, almost, right? It's you run into a lot of things when you're isolated, and we want to belong. And really any community, especially the religious community, which answers some of your biggest questions, your biggest cravings in life, your biggest thoughts. You have a group of people that share that. That's with any religion. How do they communicate with each other? How do they stay connected in a ever-growing globalized world and in an ever-growing secular world? Can they still connect? So we got to use technology, and we have to almost meet people where they're at also, right? The world around them is super flashy, whether it's TikTok, whether it's, all the other social platforms. They're craving, if you ask a lot of religious people, it doesn't matter what religion it is, they're craving for a safe and secure space where they can have dialogue about their faith, where they can learn more, where they can find resources. So really, it does apply. The concept applies to any religious community. Now, Tabella is a solely Catholic brand. Whether there's opportunities in other religions, of course, there's always opportunity, and we want to be the forefront. We want to encourage other companies to also say, hey, why don't we partner with Tabella? Maybe we can take some of their technology and apply it here. We believe that community in itself is good for the world. And that's what we do. And right now we are focused in the Catholic world. I know you had asked me prior to the show, there are opportunities, as a company. But as you guys know, in the startup world, in technology, you have to be super focused on that market. And then everything else opens up. And this is just one of those markets that, well, first, I'm very passionate, and that's where we started. But also from a technological perspective, it's the one that has probably the greatest need for some technology to come in. Because if you walk into any church right now, for the most part, their technology are their bulletin papers. And if you've walked into a church lately, this is the technology they use to communicate with their communities. Whether they see them in person or they take this home and read everything that's in it and what events are happening. And if you, as a parishioner or as a churchgoer, you want to get something to your community, you got to tell them, hey, I'm hosting this event. Can you please post it on your bulletin board? And they're like, yeah, sure. We'll post it for next Tuesday. We got to print them and give it to everyone. that's the technology they have. So obviously there's a massive gap there with how we actually
Yeah.
live our lives now.
So Juan, just
Or
to
if you're
build
not
a
even
little bit,
going to the church physically because of things like
you
COVID.
won't get anything. So
Mhm.
just to build a little bit on that question, because I think it'll paint the picture for those listening, maybe those potential entrepreneurs who say, you know what, I want to do this for my faith, right? So, right, historically, it's been a one to the many type of communication and relationship, right? Those magazines, brochures, it's one to many, right?
Mhm.
So you're saying this is a social platform, which I'm assuming allows one-to-one type of interaction between users. Can you paint a picture of what is it that Tabella is now offering to the 1.4 billion Catholics in the world that they didn't have before? What's the end benefit if I was Catholic and I wanted to take advantage of this? What is it going to do for me? What kind of capabilities does it have? Just to paint the picture of what it could do. And then obviously that might spur up some people to say, you know what, I want to do this for Buddhists or what have you, right?
Yeah, two major components. First, connection. So that communications of what I tell you, what's happening in my church, what events are going on, like, are they meeting on Wednesday to do a prayer, prayer intentions between people, like communities, they're friends, right? And they're like, hey, please pray for me. And where do you do all of that? Right now, you're forced to go into WhatsApp, and how do people find those WhatsApp groups? So first, it's connection. We connect you with your nearby communities and also global communities over time, so that you can have a voice and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Please pray for me. But for the
So
church,
it's organized by parish? I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's organized by, okay.
That's a community or a type of community. Parishes do use this as a one-to-all sort of communication because it's a big need for them. However, if you create your own community on Tabella, if it's a prayer group or a Bible study group, then you can have a very similar environment to what you have on Facebook groups or private groups, where now you have your members, you can approve who's part of your community, and now you guys are posting, sharing photos, talking to each other, and it makes communications with larger groups a bit easier. And the second component is growth. We all want to grow. It's one of our human needs is to be able to grow, and we help people grow in the faith. How did that normally look? Well, you would go to church, you get a lot of religious education from there. But now in this day and age with all sorts of media and influencers, there's so much content out there that is so good for us to nourish our faith, whether it's to hear the Bible every day, or whether it's to hear a homily or a reflection on a passage, or whether it's to pray, all the massive amounts of prayers that for thousands of years have been accumulated. Where do you find all of that? You're forced to go to either church websites that tend to be very outdated, or some guy you found on the internet that you don't know if it's trustworthy or if they're saying something that is of the faith. So we aggregate all that content that is good, that it's spiritually and faithfully sound, and we put it at the palms of the user so that they can pray, they can listen to the gospel. And there's many people doing that already on Tabella, and we're learning, of course. We keep learning and adapting, but that's the second component. So connection and growth from the faith perspective.
Cool. Let's talk about what you were just talking about with curating, let's say, content. This makes me think of quality assurance in two senses, right? You've got quality assurance in the sense of your tech, how you make sure that it's functioning properly and there's no bugs. But then there's this, I understand this to be this sort of quality assurance capacity of the reliability of the content that you are sharing. What does that process look like at Tabella?
Yeah. So we've got two great team members right now that are both very experienced. One of them has a master's in theology. She was in the convent for 12 years. So she helps us quite a bit with, okay, what is okay, in terms of theologically sound, that we're not just promoting anything, but that it really helps people grow in the faith and that it abides by the church teaching. That's one major aspect. And it's not just because we want to do that, although that's really what we want to do. It's also because users need that. They want it. They're like, hey, how do I make sure that what I'm listening to is of my religious teaching, right? Like it's very hard for people sometimes to discern. So we have that aspect. Over time, we'll have a board of members that'll, curate that a bit more. But really what Tabella focuses on is devotional content, which doesn't really there's no blurry lines as much as, content that you hear about dialogue or debates. It's really devotional. So if you want to pray, like, what prayers can I pray? And these prayers have been around for thousands of years, from the early church fathers to, different popes, from different, priests around the world. So really devotional content. And that's a very specific type of content that there's tons to do. So we actually produce some of that ourselves, like the Daily Gospel, the Rosary. In Spanish, we have tons of Spanish content. We're actually one of the most listened to. We have a podcast in Spanish, one of the most listened to Spanish podcasts in Mexico, actually, in terms of religion. So there's tons of great devotional content, and there's really no blurry lines there as you would with, okay, if I'm on Facebook, I see all sorts of things, right? So it's really to help people. It's a product to help people connect with their faith, and those pillars exist. Like, the Catholic Church, for example, has the catechism, and that's like, okay, this is what we believe. This is the sort of things that we do, and in the tradition, and we make that accessible and easier for a normal religious goer or religious abiding person to experience.
Okay, let's see if we can quickly recap what we've learned so far. So there's about 1.4 billion Catholics in the world that traditionally it's been a one-to-many type of communication between the parish and its practitioners or followers. And unless you can go physically there, it's been difficult to keep up with what's going on. And connection has happened through your traditional secular Facebook, what have you, right? So what you guys have done is created a way for people to connect with faith-based connection, which could be based on a parish. But what's interesting, you could also be cross-parish, build relationships cross-parish, which is something that you couldn't do before. You were very limited to your congregation or your church. Now you can expand that relationship beyond, so opening up more relationships and more connection. And all this is for free. So the big question is, how do you make money? Who pays the bills?
Yeah.
How do you pay the bills?
Sounds good. Yeah, of course. So I believe in capitalism. I think it's what's gotten a lot of countries and a lot of our world out of poverty. And obviously there's a right and a wrong way to do that, right? We believe that we needed to make it free for churches, because if you ask a lot of churches why they don't adopt technology, is because there is some bureaucracy of, I need to approve this, right? Like, if I'm going to pay $50 a month or $1,000 a year, like, I got to get approval, and, do we have the right budget? So we wanted to get rid of all of that, and really, they can use WhatsApp for free. They can use Facebook for free, but they're not the tools built for their type of community. So that was one core thing we needed. So how do we make money? We actually have sponsors, right? So in the Catholic world, traditionally, the bulletin board, they tend to have local advertisers in the back, which are your local parishioners, perhaps your plumber that goes to your community, and they want to tell their community, hey, I'm the plumber in this community, like, do business with me. And we share the same faith and the same values. So we bring those sponsors of that paper technology over to be the sponsors of the tech itself. Very similar to how Nextdoor does hyper-focused local ads. We do that in the context of religious communities. Over time, there's many other revenue sources. As you could imagine, if you do have a niche community, which is not so niche, it's massive, but a very targeted community, you can be that main layer that distributes other products and services when it's time to buy a new Bible, when it's time to buy something for your home. So the e-commerce plays are there. There's also the donations plays, right? Like, donation is a massive thing that is ran by the big companies right now, right? So if you want to collect donations digitally, who do you go to? And churches have to do a lot of that discernment too. With Tabella, they get it in the app itself, and we have.
Wow, so there's like a GoFundMe component.
Yeah, absolutely, and we believe we can increase church donations over time. Why? Because it's the better way than cash, right? It's the better way than checking my pockets to see if I have cash when I'm at church or when I'm away from church. I mean, if you could imagine, during the pandemic, almost every church closed down. Churches were borrowing billions of dollars from the government in order to keep their lights on. Imagine if their community was already digitized in some way, and that they can continue supporting their church easily. Like, people want to help their church.
I've
they
got an
wanna
envelope
help.
dedicated to tithes sitting in my house because I like tuck it
Yeah.
away, but I'm not actually physically going to this
Yeah.
church. So yeah, it makes sense. So my final question for you is we're coming to the end of the show. My final question doesn't mean it's the final question. Who is this resonating with most, Tabella? I mean, the generalization is the older we get, the more spiritual we get. But technology, the generalization is that speaks to the younger generations. So who is Tabella resonating with most?
It's so interesting. Our community side, which is right now, we're still in early stages, but that has been proven with actual churches where the population tends to be slightly older. So if you look at the average age, it's around 50. That's in the community piece, who's actually like going back and forth and communicating with their parish. Now, we as a technology company, we want to serve the entire array. With content, we found that the younger population, so we have some influencer priests, for example, that share some of our content, and some of the youth that follows them comes over and they're like, wow, I can pray along with this priest, or I can listen to the gospel. So the content side is a lot younger. So it's interesting how it's all panning out. Our goal is really to merge all of that. And I think we will with time, is how do we get younger people to learn about their faith, even if they're not practicing all the way per se. How do we get them and connect them to the communities? How do we get them and connect them to a youth group near them? How do we get them to go to their church and talk to someone in person? And on the other way around is, how do we get the older population who's been completely underserved and now they've been disconnected to communicate more and actually go to the newer things, right? Like the flashier content digitally, and things they weren't able to do before they have access to now. So we're right in the middle of things. I think it's an excellent time to build something like this.
So we're coming up on time, and I can't help but think and ask the question, are you seeing a revival with people?
Yes.
For spirituality, for faith?
Absolutely.
Can you paint a picture of what's happening? The pandemic shook a lot of people, shook us all to the core, right? Still is shaking us all to the core. But why is this the right time now? Is there a revival, and what's causing the revival?
I think, well, if you do practice the faith and you do a little bit of research there, you know how it all pans out, and you know who wins in the end between good and evil, or God and the devil. And like, there's a spiritual component to these things. If you want to take it a bit more practical to the audience that we're chatting with here, absolutely. There's been a massive pain that everyone's, suffered through in one way or another. Loss of jobs, loss of family members, loss of connection. So people are craving those core things that they've always had, but sometimes they're distracted by the flashiness of our world and the busyness of our world, right? 50 years ago, everything revolved around the church. Your community, maybe when you guys were growing up too, it would be around the church. Your parents would take you, your grandparents would be there, friends and family, you'd have dinner together. That was the center of community. As the world became more technological and busier, and we focused on other things, we've kind of lost touch of that. But with pain comes that hunger for that actual connection. And what better way to connect with people that share your values, people of your family, close family members that go and share your faith with you. And I think it's the perfect time to build such a thing. And I do think there's a revival. Everyone is craving, whether they know it or not, they're wondering what happens after our life here on earth. And that can only be answered through faith and religion. And I think it's a core component to our human life.
Well, Juan, it's been great to have you with us as a guest. Clearly there's a big marketplace opportunity that has not been served very well. So congratulations for carving a niche for yourself. We wish you a lot of success, and we can appreciate your excitement and how this is also a higher purpose calling for you. So thanks for being with us today. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a minute. What do we got coming up, Carlos? We got 2 shows tomorrow and 1 on Thursday. What do we got?
That is correct, Julio, Kim. and Juan. So tomorrow we have at 10 o'clock in the morning, we have a conversation with Thad Wong, the co-founder and CEO of at Properties. That's the name of the company, Properties. The topic will be tech and its effects in the real estate industry. That's at 10 o'clock in the morning. Then at our usual 12 o'clock show, the topic will be the future of sales for SaaS, software as a service companies, that is, with David Delaney, the founder and CEO of Tenbound. And finally, on Thursday at 12 p.m. Pacific, we'll be speaking with Itai Sadan, the founder and CEO of Duda, DUDA.co. And I don't have the topic, but the company is it's a low-code web design platform for companies. So we should all pay attention to it because a lot of what's going on out there. So that's what we have for this week, right here on Dojo Live, 12 p.m. Pacific and 10 tomorrow too. So join us tomorrow, everyone, and remember, be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.